The night they sold me, the moon was full. I remember thinking that was cruel. The moon is supposed to be sacred. She is supposed to protect her daughters, the she-wolves who run beneath her light, who howl in her honor, who bleed and burn and rise again under her gaze. But she watched. She watched, and she said nothing. I stood in the center of the great hall, with my wrists bound in iron rope. Not chains, iron rope, the kind they use for livestock and criminals. And I did not cry. I had decided that much. Whatever they took from me tonight, they would not take my tears. My name is Clara of the Asheville Pack. Or at least, I was. I am 19 years old. I have never shifted. I have never felt the burn of a wolf rising under my skin, never heard a second heartbeat inside my chest, never smelled the world through anything other than these ordinary, human dull senses. In a pack, that makes you less than nothing. It makes you currency. My alpha, the man who was supposed to protect every soul born under his sigil, stood at the far end of the hall, with a goblet of wine in his hand and relief on his face. Relief. As if I were a debt he was finally settling. "The Iron Maw Alpha has agreed to our terms," he announced to the assembled pack. "In exchange for 3 years of peace along the northern borders, we offer this gift." Gift. I was a gift. I looked at the faces around me. Warriors I had grown up beside, women who had braided my hair when I was small, elders who had bounced me on their knees and called me clever girl. And I searched for one. Just one face that showed outrage. I found none. I found eyes that slid away from mine. I found hands that tightened on goblets, not in anger, but in guilt they had already decided to swallow. The great doors at the end of the hall opened then. Cold air rushed in like something alive, and he walked through them. I had heard stories about Kale of the Iron Maw. Every pack had. He was the alpha who had never lost a battle, the one who had raised the Stonefen pack to ash for breaking a treaty, the one whose wolves fought without mercy and obeyed without question. He was called the Iron Ghost, the bloodless judge, the alpha who felt nothing. He was 26 years old. He looked older than the mountains. He was enormous, not in a soft, overfed way, but in the way of something carved from the land itself, broad through the shoulders, built like a fortress. He wore dark leather armor scored with old battles, a heavy fur-lined cloak the color of midnight, and at his hip, a short sword with a hilt worn smooth from use. His hair was dark. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were the color of hammered iron, pale gray and cold. He looked at my alpha, the way a wolf looks at prey it has already decided not to bother chasing. Then his gaze moved. It moved slowly across the hall, and it landed on me. I felt it like a hand pressed flat against my chest. I lifted my chin. I would not look away. Not from him, not from anyone. Something shifted in his expression. It was small, a flicker, gone before I could name it. "This is the tribute," my alpha said, gesturing toward me like I was an object on a shelf. Kyle of the Iron Maw said nothing for a long moment. Then, "She has no wolf." It wasn't a question. He had already scented it. I watched the certainty settle across his features, the slight narrowing of those pale eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. "She is still of pure Asheville blood," my alpha said quickly. "Useful, obedient. She will serve your household without complaint." Kale looked at me. Just at me, not at my alpha, not at the room, at me. "Will she?" he said, and I did something I hadn't planned to do. I looked straight back at him and said, quietly, clearly, so only he could hear, "No." The hall was too loud for anyone else to catch it, but he heard, and the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Not quite. Something older than a smile. He turned back to my alpha. "I accept the tribute," he said. "We ride at dawn." The doors closed behind his men, and my alpha had the nerve to look relieved. I stood there with iron rope on my wrists and a full moon calling overhead, and I made myself one promise. Whatever came next, whatever that man intended to make of me, I would not break. I didn't know, standing there in the ruins of everything I had ever belonged to, that fate had already decided something far more complicated than survival. I didn't know that the moment his eyes had found mine, something ancient and irreversible had already begun. I didn't know that by the time I understood it, it would already be too late to run. Chapter 1. They gave me a horse. I hadn't expected that. I had expected to walk behind the column, like the livestock they'd sold me as, stumbling through mud, rope around my wrists, eating their dust. Instead, one of Kale's men, a broad, red-haired warrior with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, handed me the reins of a gray mare without a word. I took them. I didn't thank him. We rode north as the first gray light of morning crept over the tree line. 20 Ironmaw warriors, moving in tight formation, cloaks dark against the pale dawn. No conversation, no songs, just the rhythm of hooves and the slow exhale of breath in cold air. I rode near the middle of the column. Kale rode at the front. He didn't look back once. I told myself that was a relief. I used the first few hours to take inventory of the column, of the weapons, of the terrain. Old habit. When you grow up without a wolf, you learn to use your eyes instead. The Ironmaw warriors were disciplined, lean. They carried themselves differently from the Asheville men, quieter, more deliberate, like men who had long since stopped needing to perform strength and simply were it. Their alpha moved like weather. That was the only word I had for it. Like something that changed the air around it simply by existing. By midday, we had crossed the Asheville border. I knew the moment it happened. The old stones half buried in the earth, carved with my pack's sigil, worn to near nothing by a century of rain. I watched them pass beneath my horse's hooves and felt something in my chest go quiet. Gone. All of it. Done. I had known my pack wasn't perfect. I had known for years that I existed at its margins. The wolfless girl, the liability, the one they tolerated because my parents had been valued before fever took them both. I had known I was never fully safe there, but knowing a thing and living it are entirely different. We stopped at midday to water the horses at a shallow river. I dismounted without help and led my mare to the bank, watching the current drag leaves downstream. "You haven't eaten," the voice came from just behind me. I didn't startle. I had heard him approaching. That was one thing being wolfless taught you, to compensate with every other sense you had. His footsteps were heavier than his frame suggested, and he moved with a particular rhythm I had already unconsciously catalogued. I turned. Kale stood 2 arms lengths away. He had removed the heavy cloak. It was warmer here, away from the mountain passes, and without it, the full weight of him was more apparent. Leather armor over a dark tunic. Arms crossed. That pale gaze on me, like something that couldn't quite decide what it was looking at. He held out a wrapped piece of flatbread and dried meat. I looked at it. Then at him. "Is this how this works?" I asked. "You feed me so I behave?" "I feed you," he said, "because it's midday and you haven't eaten, and my men need you conscious for the journey. Your men need me conscious." That's what I said. I took the food. Not because I wasn't hungry, I was, but because refusing it would only hurt me, and spite, while deeply satisfying, had a poor survival rate. I ate. He watched the river. "Why did you accept me?" I asked after a moment. He glanced at me. "I mean specifically," I said. "You could have demanded warriors, horses, gold. My alpha would have given you anything to keep you from raiding the northern pass again. Why ask for a wolfless girl?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I didn't ask for you." I stared at him. "What?" "Your alpha offered the tribute. I was informed it would be 3 Asheville scouts and a cartload of silver ore." His jaw tightened. "I arrived and found you instead." My blood went cold. Of course. Of course he had. I was cheaper than scouts, cheaper than silver. I was the most disposable thing in the pack, and my alpha had offered me up as a substitution, probably hoping Kale wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. And you accepted anyway, I said. I had already traveled 4 days. Refusing the tribute would have meant war. His eyes came to mine, flat, assessing. A war that would cost lives on both sides for the sake of a point. So I was the path of least resistance. You were a complication I chose to manage. There it was. Clean. Clear. No cruelty in it, just arithmetic. I appreciated that more than I expected to. At least he wasn't pretending. And what does managing me look like? I asked. You'll work in my household, he said. You'll be given a room, adequate food, and safety from my men. In exchange, you perform whatever duties my steward assigns. He paused. You are not a slave in name. I don't keep slaves. But I'm not free. No. I looked back at the river. What did your pack do to you? He asked then, quietly. The question caught me like a hook. They sold me, I said. Before that. I turned to look at him. His expression had shifted, barely, but I caught it. Something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite anger. Something that lived in the narrow space between the two. Nothing I want to discuss with you, I said. He nodded once, as if that were a reasonable answer. As if he had expected it. He turned and walked back toward the horses. And I stood there at the river's edge with bread in my hands and something strange flickering in my chest. Something that had no business being there. Not warmth. I wouldn't call it that. More like the awareness of warmth. The knowledge that somewhere near me, something burned. I pressed it down. Hard. And followed the column north. Chapter 2. 3 days. That was how long it took to reach Ironmaw territory. 3 days of riding through terrain that grew wilder and more beautiful with every passing mile. Forests so dense they swallowed the light, rivers running clear over dark stone, mountain passes where the wind had voices. It was nothing like the Asheville lands, which were flat and open and always slightly too warm. Ironmaw land felt ancient. Like it remembered things. The keep itself appeared on the evening of the 3rd day, rising from the mountain's shoulder like it had grown there rather than been built. Black stone, high walls, watchtowers that caught the dying light and held it. A gate of iron-banded oak 12 feet high. And beyond all of it, wolves. Not in their shifted forms, in every other way. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The settlement that had grown up around and within the keep was alive with them. Children running between buildings, warriors moving with that particular fluid precision, elders seated at fires with their eyes sharp and their hands still. They all stopped when the gate opened. They all looked. At him first, at their alpha returning, with the particular quality of relief that a pack shows when its center comes home. Then at me, the girl behind him. The stranger. I felt their assessment like a physical thing, scenting, reading, measuring. I had spent my whole life being measured by wolves and found insufficient. But this was different. This was a pack that didn't know me yet, which meant their judgment hadn't been decided in advance. It was almost worse. A woman met us in the inner courtyard. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled severely back and eyes the same pale gray as Kale's. She wore a dark dress under a heavy shawl, and she moved with the particular authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to announce it. "My lord," she said to Kale. "Mira!" He dismounted, handed his reins to a stable hand. "The tribute from Asheville. Find her appropriate quarters in the East Wing and assign her to laundry or kitchen work for now." Mira looked at me. She didn't say what she was thinking, but I watched her think it. "Of course," she said. "Come." I dismounted and followed her. She walked fast, spoke little, led me through corridors of black stone lit by torches set in iron sconces, up a narrow staircase, and into a small room on the east side of the keep. It was not luxurious. Stone floor, a narrow bed with a wool blanket, a washstand with a clay pitcher. But the window had real shutters, and the door had a latch. on the inside. I noticed that last part immediately. Meals are in the common hall at dawn, midday, and dusk, Mira said. You'll report to the laundry head at dawn tomorrow. Don't wander past the inner wall until you've been given clearance. Questions? 1, I said. Does anyone here know what I am? She looked at me with those pale, sharp eyes. They know you came from Asheville, she said. They know you have no wolf. And what does that make me to them? She considered that, for longer than I expected. That depends entirely on you, she said, and left. I stood in the middle of the small room and listened to the sounds of the keep settling around me. Distant voices, the clang of metal from the training yard, the low howl of wind off the mountain. The smell of wood smoke and pine, and something colder, mineral, like stone after rain. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs. I thought about my alpha's face, that relief, and I let myself feel the anger of it for exactly 30 seconds. Then I folded it away. Anger could wait. Survival came first. I was 3 days' ride from everything I had ever known. I was in the keep of the most feared alpha on the continent. I had no wolf, no allies, no leverage. What I had was a room with a latch on the inside. I latched it, and for the first time since the night in the Great Hall, I let myself breathe. But sleep, when it came, brought something strange with it. A scent I didn't recognize. Dark and resinous, like cedarwood and cold iron, and something underneath both. Something warm and deeply animal. I woke at midnight with my heart beating too fast and no explanation for why. I lay in the dark and listened. Nothing. No threat. No presence. Just that scent hanging in the air of my room as if someone had walked through it while I slept. But the latch was still closed. I pressed my hand to my sternum, where a strange pulling ache had settled. Strange, I thought. Then I forced myself back to sleep. I didn't know yet that the ache would not be gone by morning. I didn't know it would never fully leave. Chapter 3. I woke before dawn and lay still in the gray dark, mapping the sounds of the keep the way I had always mapped unfamiliar places. Water moving through stone pipes deep in the walls, the distant creak of the gate, footsteps on flagstone, heavy, booted, regular, a patrol. The low murmur of voices from somewhere below, and beneath all of it, quiet and constant, the sound of the mountain breathing. I dressed quickly in the plain clothes Mira had left folded on the washstand, dark wool dress, leather belt, soft boots, and unlocked my room. The east wing corridor was empty and dim. I made my way to the laundry without being directed. Old habit. Find your role quickly. Make yourself useful before anyone has reason to question your presence. It was a survival strategy I had perfected over years of being the wolfless girl in a wolf pack. The laundry head was a small, fierce woman named Dana, who spoke in short bursts and did not believe in unnecessary words. She put me to work immediately, hauling water, boiling linens, wringing and hanging and folding with the 3 other girls who worked the morning shift. None of them spoke to me directly for the first 2 hours. I worked and listened. The laundry opened onto a courtyard, and through the courtyard I could see the training yard. That was where the warriors were by the time the sun had crested the wall, moving through drills in the cold morning air, sparring with wooden practice blades and live steel both. I watched when I could. I was looking for patterns, weaknesses, exits, things a girl with no wolf and no allies needs to know. I was not looking for him. But there he was. Kekel trained with his men, not apart from them, not observing from a distance like the Asheville Alpha, who believed his authority too elevated for sweat. He was in the middle of the yard, stripped to a dark tunic, a practice sword in each hand, working through a partnered drill with a warrior nearly as large as himself. He moved like water over stone, fluid, inevitable, fast in a way his size made almost offensive. I watched him disarm his partner, a twist, a rotation, the practice blade spinning away. And then, instead of pressing the advantage, he stepped back. said something I was too far away to hear. His partner retrieved the blade. They reset. He was teaching. That surprised me enough that I nearly dropped the sheet I was wringing. He was teaching, not dominating. There was a difference. The Asheville Alpha had demonstrated the same. "You're staring!" One of the laundry girls, the youngest, maybe 16, with dark braids and sharp eyes, was watching me watch him. "I'm observing," I said. She snorted. Quietly, so Dana wouldn't hear. "That's the same thing." "Your Alpha trains with his warriors personally," I said. "That's not common." She shrugged, ringing a pillowcase with practiced efficiency. "Lord Kale says you can't lead what you don't understand. He trains every morning." She paused. "He also runs the perimeter at night, alone." "Alone?" "Always alone at night." She glanced at me sideways. "He's been different this past week, though." "Different how?" She hesitated. "Restless?" Mira noticed it. Some of the older warriors, too. She lowered her voice. "They say it started 4 days ago." 4 days ago. The same day he'd left to collect the Asheville tribute. The same day he had walked through my pack's great hall and looked at me. Something shifted in my chest. Something cold and electrical. "What's your name?" I asked the girl. "Lyra," she said. "I'm Sarah." "I know." She gave me a look that was curious rather than unkind. "Everyone knows who you are. And what do they think of me?" She considered this with the refreshing directness of the very young. "Most of them think you're a temporary problem, something Lord Kale accepted because refusing would have meant a skirmish he didn't want." She paused. "Some of the older warriors think he should have refused anyway. That accepting a wolfless tribute was an insult he let slide." "That tracks," I said. "But Mira doesn't think so." I looked at her. "What does Mira think?" Lyra opened her mouth. And then the bell above the inner gate rang, the single clear tone that marked a change of shift, and Dana's voice cracked across the courtyard like a whip. "Lyra, focus!" She snapped back to the linens. I turned back to the courtyard and stopped. Kyle was standing at the edge of the training yard, sword loose at his side, looking directly at the laundry courtyard, looking directly at me. I had felt his gaze before I turned. That was what made me turn in the first place, that pressing weight, that sense of being found by something it was dangerous to be found by. Our eyes met across the open courtyard. Neither of us moved. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way that felt wrong. Too loud, too present, like something was amplifying it. I was aware of the cold morning air on my face, and the wet linen in my hands, and the 30 feet of open stone between us. I was aware of that scent, the one that had woken me in the night. Cedar and iron, and something warm underneath. It was him. I understood it in a rush that felt like stepping wrong on a stair, that lurching, falling recognition. The scent that had filled my room in the night, the ache in my chest that hadn't faded through sleep. The way his gaze landed on me, like wait. No. I turned away first, focused on the linen, wrung it until my hands ached. I had heard of the mate bond, of course. Every wolf-born child was raised on it. The sacred connection, the fated recognition. Two souls designed by something older than gods to find each other. I had heard of it. I had never expected it. Not for me. Not the wolfless girl, and certainly not him. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum, where the ache sat like a coal. "It's not possible," I told myself. "You have no wolf. The bond requires 2 wolves. This is something else. Proximity, stress, the strangeness of a new place." I told myself this firmly. I believed it almost completely. That evening, I was crossing the inner courtyard alone, carrying a stack of folded linens to the storage room near the east tower, when I rounded a corner and walked directly into him. The linens went everywhere. For one fractured second, the world narrowed entirely to sensation. His hand caught my arm to steady me, fast, reflexive. The grip of someone whose body reacts before thought catches up. My palm pressed flat against his chest as I caught my balance. His fingers wrapped around my upper arm, firm and warm through the wool of my sleeve. The ache in my chest didn't just intensify, it roared. It was like a fire that had been breathing small suddenly fed on open air. Like something sleeping in my bones woke all at once and recognized something. I pulled back. He released me. Both of us stepped apart in the same instant, as if burned. The folded linens lay scattered across the flagstones. Neither of us moved to pick them up. His breathing had changed. I could hear it, slightly faster, slightly deeper. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone very still, the way eyes go still when the mind behind them is working through something urgent. I knew because I was doing the same thing. "Careful," he said finally. His voice came out wrong, lower than his usual register, rougher. "Apologies," I managed. I crouched and began gathering the linens with hands that were only slightly unsteady. He crouched on the other side of the scattered pile. He helped me. We folded in silence, 2 arms lengths apart, neither looking at the other directly, and the courtyard felt too small and too large at the same time. "The room is adequate?" he said, when the last piece was folded. "Yes," I stood. "Thank you." He rose. He was very close, not indecently close, but close enough that I could see the particular quality of his stillness, the way a large, powerful animal goes still when it's processing something it doesn't have a category for. "Sarah," he said. It was the first time he had used my name. It moved through me like struck metal. "Yes," I said steady. "If anyone in this keep gives you cause for complaint." "I'll handle it," I said. Something crossed his face. "You're very certain of that." "I've been handling things alone for a long time." He looked at me for one more beat. Then he stepped back, nodded once, and walked away. I stood in the courtyard with a stack of folded linens and a heart pounding against my ribs like something trapped. It's not the bond, I told myself. It's not. But my hands were trembling, and somewhere deep in my chest, in the place where a wolf should have lived, something that had been silent my entire life was beginning, very slowly, to stir. Chapter 4. He avoided me for 4 days. I noticed immediately. Not because I was watching for him, I told myself that firmly, repeatedly, but because in a keep this size, with a household this structured, the alpha's movements created patterns. Meals at the high table, morning training, evening council in the war room, patrol check at the gate. Those patterns continued, but everywhere I was, he wasn't. If I was in the east corridor, he used the west passage. If I was crossing the inner courtyard, he had already passed through it. If I arrived at the common hall, he was just leaving. It would have been invisible to anyone not paying attention. I was always paying attention. What bothered me most was that it wasn't cold. It wasn't the deliberate cutting distance of a man who wanted to make a point. It felt more like a man trying to protect something. The way you walk carefully around a fire you're not sure you can control. That frightened me more than coldness would have. On the 5th morning, Lyra found me in the laundry, with an expression she was trying and failing to keep neutral. "Mira wants you," she said. "For what?" She didn't say. A pause. She never says, but she had her thinking face on. I followed Lyra through the keep corridors to Mira's private workroom, a precise, organized space that smelled of dried herbs and beeswax, with shelves of ledgers and a writing table where the silver-haired woman sat with her hands folded and her eyes already on the door when I entered. "Sit," she said. I sat. She looked at me the way I had begun to recognize, not unkindly, but with the particular directness of someone who had decided to deal with a problem honestly rather than around the edges. "How are you settling?" she asked. "Well enough," I said. "Dana says you work without complaint and learn quickly." A slight pause. "She also says you watch everything." "Is that a problem?" "In this keep, awareness is a survival skill." Mira tilted her head. "I'm moving you." I went still. "From laundry?" "To household management. You'll assist me directly." She held up a hand before I could speak. Before you ask, it isn't a reward and it isn't a punishment. I'm short-staffed and you're competent. It's arithmetic. I studied her. Why do I feel like that's not all of it? Her mouth twitched, just slightly. Because you watch everything, she said. And you're right that it isn't all of it. She folded her hands on the table. You'll be managing the Alpha's household accounts, supply orders, scheduling, coordination between the kitchen, laundry, stable, and guard shifts. My chest tightened. That puts me in direct contact with him. Yes. You're doing that deliberately. Yes. I stared at her. Why? She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, wind moved through the pines on the mountain slope, a sound like distant water. Because he has been walking around this keep for 5 days, she said carefully, like a man trying not to think about something that has completely taken over his thinking. She met my eyes. And in 30 years of serving this household, I have never seen Kale of the Iron Maw run from anything. The word landed between us. Run. He's not running, I said, though the word felt right in a way I didn't want it to. He is! She rose from her chair, a signal the meeting was ending, which means whatever he's running from frightens him. She looked at me with those ancient sharp eyes. In my experience, the things that frighten powerful men most tend to be the things they most need. She handed me a ledger. Report to the war room steward before midday, she said. He'll transfer the accounts. I left her workroom with the ledger under my arm, and Mira's words following me down the corridor like footsteps. The things that frighten powerful men most tend to be the things they most need. I pressed my free hand against my sternum. The coal was still there, still burning. The war room occupied the keep's north tower, and it smelled exactly as I expected. Iron and old smoke and leather, and the particular dry scent of parchment that has absorbed too many arguments. The steward, a thin, efficient man named Corin, transferred the relevant accounts to me in 40 minutes with the manner of someone deeply relieved to have fewer things to worry about. I spent the rest of the morning at a side table, learning the structure of Iron Maw's household accounts with the focus of a person who needs their mind to be very, very occupied. I was halfway through the stable requisitions when the door opened. I didn't look up. I knew it was him. Cedar and iron and warmth. His footsteps crossed the room. He stopped at the main war table. I could tell from sound alone, and there was the creak of leather as he leaned over parchment. Maps, probably. He was always over the maps. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Mira moved you, he said finally. Yes. I didn't authorize that. She said she didn't need you to. A pause. She's right. She doesn't. Another pause. That wasn't a complaint. I looked up then. He was at the war table, a large sectional map spread before him, his hands braced on the table's edge. He was looking at the map, not at me. Then what was it? I asked. An observation. Observing that I'm in your war room. Observing that Mira has opinions. His jaw shifted. She usually acts on them regardless of what I think. I'm beginning to like her, I said. Something almost imperceptible crossed his face. I thought it might have been the furthest edge of a smile. We worked in silence for a while. It was not comfortable silence. Nothing between us was comfortable yet. But it was bearable. It had a shape to it, like two people learning the edges of something new. Sarah. I looked up again. He was still studying the map. His voice had dropped into that lower register again, the one that vibrated in my sternum in ways I actively refused to examine. The night in the Ashvale Hall, he said. You told me no. I waited. Most people, he said slowly, do not tell me no. I noticed. It didn't. He stopped, started again. It should have irritated me. Should have, I said carefully. His hands pressed harder against the table. It didn't. The coal in my chest pulsed. I set my quill down before I could press it hard enough to break the nib. What did it do? I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to. He lifted his gaze from the map and looked at me, fully, directly, without the careful management I had watched him practice for 5 days. Whatever was in his eyes in that moment, I didn't have a name for it. It was too complex and too raw for a single name. "Something I'm still working out," he said. The door banged open. A warrior, young, slightly breathless, leaned into the war room with the particular expression of someone carrying urgent news. "My lord, scouts from the eastern ridge. They've found tracks." Kyle straightened. The alpha reassembled itself over his features like a mask sliding into place. Smooth, complete, impenetrable. "How many?" he said. 8, maybe 10. Moving in formation. "Armed?" "Fully." He was already moving, cloak swinging as he crossed to the door. He paused in the threshold. For one fraction of a second, his gaze came back to me. Then he was gone, and I sat alone in the war room with my hands flat on the account ledger and my heart hammering against something it couldn't name. Something I'm still working out, so was I. Moon above, so was I. Chapter 5. He didn't come back until well past dark. I knew because I was still in the war room. I told myself it was the accounts. The stable requisitions were genuinely complex. 6 months of supply orders with 3 separate scribes' handwriting and at least 2 mathematical errors I had already found. I told myself I was not waiting. I was absolutely waiting. Which was humiliating enough that I was deeply committed to not examining it. The keep around me had shifted into its evening rhythm. The common hall noise rising and falling, the patrol change at the gate, the distant sound of children being called inside. Torches burned low in the sconces, and I had lit a second candle when the first burned to a stub. The door opened. Cale came in alone. He was not injured. I checked immediately, automatically, and hated that it was automatic. But he was tired. Tired in the deep way of someone who had been running on will for hours. There was mud on his boots, and his cloak was damp from the mountain mist. He stopped when he saw me. "You're still here," he said. "The stable accounts had errors," I said. "I was correcting them." He looked at the table, at the arrangement of neatly stacked, completed ledgers. "All of them," he said. "There were errors in all of them." He crossed to the sideboard, poured himself water from the ceramic jug, drank, set the cup down, stood with his back to me for a moment, and I watched the tension in his shoulders as something he was carrying slowly, partially, released. "Scouts from Greymere," he said, still facing the sideboard. "Moving through our eastern territory, not raiding, tracking." "Tracking what?" "Not what." He turned. "Who?" I went still. His pale eyes found mine across the room. "They were following our route from Asheville," he said. "My route." My stomach dropped. "Someone told them about the tribute," I said. My voice was very even. "Yes. Someone from Asheville." "That would be my guess." His jaw was hard. "Greymere has been looking for a reason to move against us for 2 seasons. A tribute exchange is a moment of transition, a potential vulnerability." He paused. "They may have been sent to see if what Asheville gave me was worth taking." Worth taking! I understood immediately. My mouth went dry. "They were assessing whether I was leverage," I said. "Yes." "Am I?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Not to me," he said. "But to Greymere, if they believe you accepted a valuable tribute. They may attempt to use you to pressure me. Yes." He came to the table, sat in the chair across from mine, not his usual position at the head of the war table, but across from me, at the working end. "Which means your safety here just became a more complex problem." I know you can handle things." There was no impatience in it, only a firmness that cut off my reflex before it could finish forming. "This is not about your capability. This is about Greymere having 10 armed men who do not know the word handle and don't particularly care what you're capable of." I closed my mouth. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and rubbed a hand over his jaw, a gesture I hadn't seen from him before. Less composed, more human. "I'm going to restrict your movement outside the inner wall," he said. "Temporarily." "Define temporarily." "Until I know the extent of Greymere's interest." "And if their interest is extensive? Then we have a larger conversation." I looked at him across the table, at this man who had not asked for me, who had accepted an unwanted complication with arithmetic, who avoided me for 5 days, and then helped me pick up linens off flagstones and said things like something I'm still working out in a voice that did things to my sternum. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked. "My safety." He met my gaze. "You are under my protection," he said. "That is not nothing." "It could be nothing," I said. "I'm a tribute from a pack you have no alliance with, accepted under duress, with no political value. My safety costs you resources. Greymere poses a genuine strategic threat. The arithmetic," I gestured vaguely, "doesn't work in my favor." His eyes had gone very still again. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." "So why?" He was quiet, long enough that the candle flame bent sideways in a draft from somewhere, and I watched it recover, and he watched me watch it. "Because," he said finally, very low, "you looked at me in that hall and told me no, and something in me—" He stopped, started differently. "Something in me has been paying attention to you since that moment in a way I cannot account for by any logic I possess." The room was very quiet. My heart was not. "Kyle," I said, and his name felt strange in my mouth, too large for 2 syllables, too much weight for a single word. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't ask me to explain it." His voice was rough at the edges. "I don't have an explanation. I have," he exhaled. "I have the fact of it, that's all." I pressed my hand flat against the table between us, not reaching, not pulling back, just present. "I don't have a wolf," I said, very quietly. "I know. The bond requires—" "I know what the bond requires." His voice was very controlled. "I know what it requires, and I know what I feel, and those 2 things are currently in direct conflict, and I am doing my best to—" He stopped again. "To be sensible about it." "Is it working?" I asked. A long pause. "No," he said. And despite everything, despite the iron rope that had been on my wrists 5 days ago, the pack that had sold me, the Greymere scouts tracking my route, the complete impossibility of everything about this situation, something in my chest opened, just slightly, just enough for light to get through. He posted 2 guards outside my room that night. I didn't argue. I lay in the dark and pressed my hand to my sternum and felt it, the ache that was no longer just an ache, but something more complex, more layered, something that had started to have a shape. I thought about what he'd said. I have the fact of it, that's all. I thought about the mate bond, what I knew of it, which was the same thing every pack child knew. 2 wolves. Recognition. A pull you couldn't reason your way out of and couldn't outrun. 2 wolves. I had no wolf. I had never shifted, never would. The pack healer had told my parents when I was 7. A gentle, careful explanation that I had heard through a door I wasn't supposed to be standing behind. Some are born without the second soul. It happens rarely. It cannot be forced or fixed without the second soul. I lay in the dark and thought about that. And then I thought about the way something in my chest had stirred when he touched my arm. Woke rather than stirred. Like something that had been asleep a very long time. Some are born without the second soul. Or, my breath caught. What if it wasn't absent? What if it had simply never been called? I pressed my hand harder against my sternum, against the ache that burned like a coal, like a question, like a beginning, and deep beneath my ribs, something breathed. Chapter 6. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I lay awake until the sky in the window went from black to purple to the cold, pale gray of early dawn, and the whole time that sensation beneath my ribs kept moving, kept shifting, like something adjusting itself to a space it was learning was real. I had spent 19 years being told what I was: wolfless, incomplete, an absence where something should be. I had believed it, not without grief. The grief had been deep and quiet, and I had learned to fold it small enough to carry without being crushed by it. But I had believed it, because the pack healer had said it clearly and the evidence was everywhere. No shift, no second heartbeat, no wolf's sense of the world amplified beyond the human. But this was not nothing. I sat up before dawn, dressed in the dark, and crept out of my room. The 2 guards posted outside my door straightened. "I'm not leaving the inner wall," I said, before either could speak. "I need air." They exchanged a glance. "Let me pass." I went to the small walled garden on the east side of the keep. Not a decorative garden, a working one. Herbs and root vegetables in neat rows, a stone bench at the center worn smooth by years of use. Cold, empty. The mountain air sharp and clean. I sat on the bench and pressed both hands against my chest. All right, I thought. Talk to me. Silence. Then, not words. Not anything as clear as words. More like a quality of attention, like something turning toward me, the way a sleeping creature turns toward warmth. Present. Aware. I exhaled slowly. "You've been there this whole time," I said, barely above a breath. Not a question. The response was not yes, not no. It was more like the feeling of recognition between 2 people who have known each other for so long, they have stopped needing to introduce themselves. Something in me that I had no language for was meeting something in me I had no language for. I sat in the cold garden until the sky was fully light, and when I finally stood and turned to go back inside, I nearly walked into Kyle again. He stopped 3 feet away, a clay mug in each hand, steam rising from both. He looked at me. I looked at him. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." I paused. "You?" "I always run the perimeter before dawn." He extended one of the mugs toward me. I took it, wrapped both hands around the warmth. We stood in the entrance to the garden, the cold morning bright between us, and for a moment, neither spoke. "The Greymere scouts," I said. "Did your men track them back?" "To the edge of our territory. Then they split. 2 went east, the rest south." He looked into his mug. "They're reporting back. We'll know more in a day or 2 what they intend." "And if they intend to make a move?" "Then we respond." "With what?" He glanced at me. "With everything we have." I wrapped my hands tighter around the mug. "Tell me about Greymere," I said. He looked at me steadily. "Why?" "Because knowing your enemy is better than not knowing your enemy." I held his gaze. "And right now, whatever Greymere wants, I seem to be part of the calculation." He studied me for a long moment. Then he came to the bench and sat, and I sat beside him, and he told me. Greymere was a Western pack, large, ambitious, ruled by an alpha named Duran, who had inherited power from his father and spent the last decade trying to expand it. He had absorbed 2 smaller packs through political marriages. He had raided 3 others and taken their territory by force. He and Kyle had been circling each other for 2 years. "He wants the northern trade routes," Kyle said. "They run through Ironmaw territory. Control them, and you control the movement of goods between the 5 major packs. And you won't negotiate. I've offered him fair terms 3 times. Each time he's come back with demands that would amount to surrendering half our territorial access." His jaw was hard. "Darren doesn't negotiate. He escalates until the other side concedes or breaks." "So he's looking for pressure," I said slowly. "A way to force a concession without open war." "Yes." "And if he believes you've formed an attachment to the Asheville tribute?" "He'd use it." Kyle's voice was flat. By threatening me. Or taking you. His voice was flatter still. To force my hand. I turned this over in my mind. The coal in my chest burned steady and warm, and I was becoming less afraid of it, though not less aware. He'd be wrong about the attachment, I said carefully. Technically. Cale looked at me. Not away from the garden, not into his mug. At me. Technically, he agreed, very quietly. The word sat between us, and neither of us picked it up. Then we shouldn't give him reason to believe otherwise, I said. I should stay within the inner wall, remain inconspicuous, give him nothing to work with. That would be sensible, he said. Can you be sensible about this? His jaw tightened. I'm trying. Kyle. I turned on the bench to face him more directly. His name still felt large in my mouth, but I was getting used to carrying large things. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. He met my eyes. Ask. What do you feel when I'm near? He was very still. That's not a small question, he said. No, I agreed. It's not. He set his mug down on the bench between us. He looked at his hands for a moment, and then he said, like gravity. Like the way the earth pulls at everything and you don't notice it until something reminds you it was never optional. The garden was silent. The coal in my chest had become a fire. I feel it too, I said. He looked up. I don't know what it is, I said quickly. I should have no wolf. I should be incapable of whatever this is, but I feel it. I pressed a hand to my chest. Here, since the moment you touched my arm in the corridor. Something was happening to his expression. Slowly, the way light changes at the edge of an eclipse, the careful, enormous shift of something that knows what's coming. Siri, he said. It doesn't make sense, I said. And I'm not asking anything of you. I'm not claiming anything. You asked for honesty, and that's the honest answer. He reached out, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who was making a choice rather than following an impulse. He pressed his hand over mine, over the place where my hand rested against my chest, and the fire inside me became something vast and ancient and roaring. I felt my breath leave me. I felt his, just slightly unsteady, and deep in my chest, in the place that had breathed in the dark garden before dawn, something answered him. Not words, not a howl, something older than both. We stayed like that for a moment that felt entirely outside of ordinary time. Then a shout from the direction of the gate, a guard calling a routine report, broke across the garden like cold water, and we came back into the morning, into the stone bench, into the keep and the mountain, and everything that was still complicated and dangerous and unresolved. He took his hand back, but slowly. We should, he began. Yes, I said. We rose. We walked back toward the keep in silence. At the door, he paused. When this is settled, he said, the Greymere situation, yes? I'd like to understand what's happening. He looked at me with those pale eyes. With you, with this. So would I said. He nodded once, and we went inside, and neither of us said the word that was sitting in the air between us, enormous and impossible, and growing less impossible with every passing hour. Mate. Neither of us said it, but we both knew it was already there. Chapter 7. 3 days passed, quiet days on the surface, the kind of quiet that has teeth. I worked the household accounts with the focus of someone determined to be useful rather than decorative, and I was good at it, better than I had expected, which surprised me until I realized it shouldn't. Numbers didn't care whether you had a wolf. Logic didn't require a second soul. I found 2 more errors in the supply ledgers, reorganized the kitchen requisition schedule to eliminate a recurring shortage, and identified an overcharge from a merchant in the valley that had been quietly compounding for 8 months. Corin, the war room steward, stopped looking at me like a temporary problem by the 2nd day. By the 3rd, he was asking my opinion on the grain stores. But beneath the surface, beneath the work and the routine and the careful normalcy I was constructing around myself like a wall, something was happening. The thing under my ribs was no longer subtle. It moved constantly now, not in a frightening way, not like pain or illness, more like a tide that was coming in gradually and would not be reasoned back out to sea. At night it was strongest. I would lie awake and feel it shifting, testing, the way water tests the edges of a vessel, and I was beginning to understand that it was not separate from me. It was me, a part of me that had been folded away, or locked away, or simply never spoken to, and was now waking up because something had finally called it by its true name. He had called it. Not with words, with that hand pressed over mine in the garden, with gravity. On the third evening, I was in the herb garden pulling dead growth from the rosemary beds. Mira had asked me to, and it was the kind of work that left the mind free to move. When it happened, the light was failing. The sky above the keep walls had gone deep amber, fading fast. And I smelled it. Not cedar and iron, something else entirely, something wrong, sharp, chemical. The bitter edge of a particular poison, wolfbane oil, used to muffle a shifter's senses, carried on the wind from the direction of the east wall. I went still. My hands stopped in the rosemary. The smell was faint, deliberately faint, applied carefully so it wouldn't trigger the sharper senses of the wolves inside the wall. But I was wolfless. My nose was ordinary, human-calibrated, and the wolfbane oil was not designed to hide from ordinary noses. They had not accounted for me. I rose slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. Moved toward the east wall without running. Running would be noticed. I moved like someone going about ordinary business, checking the angle of the shadows, counting the patrol positions from memory. One guard on the east wall. There should have been two. I turned and walked, quickly, controlled, back into the keep. I found Kyle in the war room with two of his senior warriors, bent over a spread of maps. He looked up when I came through the door. He read my face in an instant. "Out," he said to the warriors. They went without question. "Talk," he said. "East wall, wolfbane oil on the wind, faint, applied from outside. And your east wall patrol is short one guard." He was already moving before I finished the sentence, hand on the short sword at his hip. "How long ago?" 5 minutes. "Maybe 6? "Which section?" "Northeast corner. The shadow of the granary blocks sightlines from the watchtower." He stopped at the door and looked back at me. "Go to your room," he said. "Take the interior corridor. Don't stop." "Kyle?" "Please." He said it with a roughness that surprised us both. Then he was gone, his boots fast and quiet on the stone corridor. I stood in the war room for exactly 4 seconds. Then I did not go to my room. I went to the armory. I was not a warrior. I want to be clear about that. I had no training with a blade, no experience in combat. What I had was 19 years of being the smallest, weakest, most overlooked person in any room she entered, which meant 19 years of learning to use what was available. The armory was unlocked. Kale's warriors had just pulled weapons in a hurry. I found a short knife, the kind used for camp work, heavy enough to mean something in the right circumstances. I tucked it into my belt and went to find out what was happening. The northeast corner of the inner courtyard was chaos wrapped in darkness. 2 Greymere men had come over the east wall. Not a raid, not an army. A surgical extraction, which was worse. They were already inside the inner yard, moving fast, when Kale's men intercepted them. I pressed against the granary wall and watched. Combat between wolf shifters in human form was faster than most people understood. No elegant choreography. Pure force and instinct. Bodies that healed quickly and hit harder than human bodies had any right to. The sounds were terrible. The crack of impact, the scrape of iron against stone. Kale was already there, in the middle of it. He fought without his sword. He didn't need it. He moved through the 2 Greymere men like a force of nature, controlled, efficient, devastating. The first went down in seconds. The second held longer, got a blade close to Kale's side. I watched my own breath stop. Before Kale caught the wrist, twisted, and the man went down hard. 4 Iron Maw warriors flanked them, held. It was over in under a minute. In the ringing silence that followed, Kale looked up. He found me immediately. Across the dark courtyard, against the granary wall, with a camp knife in my hand. His expression in that moment was something I had no complete name for. He crossed the courtyard. He stood in front of me and looked at the knife. Then at my face. Then at the knife again. "I told you," he said, very controlled, "to go to your room." "I heard you," I said. "Then, they weren't there for the wall," I said. "They were there for me." I held his gaze. "You needed to know which direction they were coming from on the inside." He stared at me. "You made yourself bait," he said. "I made myself useful," I corrected. He said something quiet and not entirely polite under his breath. "Kale." I lowered the knife. "I was right." "You were." His voice was rough. "And if they had reached you—" "They didn't. If they had, they didn't." I stepped closer. Instinct, not calculation. "I'm here. I'm fine. Your men are fine. The threat is contained." I looked up at him in the torchlight. "Stop imagining alternatives." He looked down at me. Very close now. Close enough that the firelight caught the gray of his eyes and made them look briefly, impossibly warm. "You terrify me," he said, quietly. Like a fact he had given up trying to argue with. The thing under my ribs surged. "Good," I said. "I was beginning to think nothing could." And for the first time, for the absolute first time, he laughed. It was brief, rough, like something shaking loose that had been lodged for a long time. But it was real, and it transformed his face in a way that was almost unbearable to witness. Then it faded, and his expression settled back into something careful and complicated and very close. "Inside," he said. "Now." I went. This time, I didn't argue. Chapter 8. He posted 4 guards outside my room that night. 4. I counted them through the door before I latched it, and then I sat on the edge of my bed with the camp knife still in my hand, and the ache in my chest so large it was difficult to breathe around it. The Greymere men were talking. Kale's warriors knew how to ask questions that received answers. I didn't ask for details, and none were offered, but by morning there would be information. I slept in short intervals. At dawn, I heard the guards change shift. At mid-morning, Mira came to my room. She sat in the chair by the window, with her hands folded and her expression arranged very carefully around something she hadn't decided how to say yet. I sat on the bed and waited, because I had learned that Mira would arrive at her point in her own time, and pressure only slowed her. "The Greymere men talked," she said. "I assumed." "They were sent specifically for you." She paused. "Darren of Greymere has decided that the Ashfield tribute represents a strategic attachment on Kale's part. He believes if he takes you, he can leverage it." "He's not entirely wrong," I said very quietly. Mira looked at me with those sharp silver eyes and said nothing. "Who told him?" I asked. Her expression shifted. "That," she said, "is the part that's more difficult." My stomach tightened. "Tell me." "The information about your transfer, the specific timing, the route, the fact that you were a personal tribute rather than a resource exchange, that's particular information." She paused. "It came from inside the Iron Maw household." The room went very quiet. "Who?" I said. "A stable hand. Young man, been here 4 years. Greymere has his family." The anger came fast and clean, and I let it move through me. Coercion, not malice. Desperation wearing the shape of betrayal. "Is he—" "Kyle has him in the lower hall. He's unharmed." Mira's voice was careful. "For now. Kale will want consequences. Kale wants understanding first." Her eyes found mine. "That's the part about him that surprises people." I looked at her. He doesn't just punish. He understands first, then he decides. A slight pause. It's what makes him a different kind of alpha from most. She looked out the window, toward the mountain. And it's part of why... She stopped herself. Part of why what? She shook her head slightly. Come, he wants to see you. The lower hall was a large, low-ceilinged room used for storage in ordinary times. Today, it held 3 of Kyle's senior warriors, standing at intervals along the walls, and in the center, a young man, perhaps 18, slight, with dark circles under terrified eyes, sitting on a stool with his hands free and no bindings on him. Kyle stood a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He looked at me when I came in. Something in the line of his shoulders changed, barely, but I caught it. The young man looked at me too. His eyes were enormous with guilt. His name is Tam, Mira said quietly beside me. Kale spoke without preamble. You've heard? Yes, I said. I want you here because this involves you directly. He glanced at Tam. Go ahead. Tam's voice was barely above a whisper. My sister is in Greymere territory. She was taken 3 months ago during a border skirmish. She wasn't a warrior. She was in the wrong place. His throat worked. They told me if I sent information, they'd release her. They told me if I didn't. He stopped, pressed his eyes closed. The room was very still. Did they release her? I asked. Everyone looked at me. Tam opened his eyes, shook his head. They said they'd release her when the extraction was complete. So they used your love for your sister to send 2 men over the wall to take me, I said, and they were never going to release her. Tam's face collapsed. He looked very young and very broken. I looked at Kale. Kale was watching me with an expression I was learning to read. That particular quality of stillness that meant he was processing something important. What would you like done? He asked me. The question landed strangely. He was asking me, not the warriors, not Mira, me. Find the sister, I said. Send someone to find her. I looked at Tam. And make him work it off. Twice the stable shifts. Whatever the value of the harm is, let him earn it back. I paused. He was trying to save someone he loved. Greymere turned him into a weapon. The blame sits more heavily there. Silence. Tam was staring at me with something in his face that was dangerously close to breaking him open entirely. Kale uncrossed his arms. Do it, he said to the warrior nearest the door. Scouts to Greymere's southern holding. Find the girl. The warrior left. Kale looked at Tam. You'll work under Dana until this is settled. You'll report to me weekly. He paused. And if you receive any further contact from Greymere, I'll come to you immediately, Tam said, barely audible. I swear it. Kyle nodded once. He came to where I stood near the door. He was close. He was always close now, and neither of us pretended that was accidental. That was... he began. I've been on the receiving end of pack arithmetic, I said quietly. I know what it feels like to be the most disposable piece on the board. I looked up at him. Tam isn't disposable. He looked at me for a long moment. No, he said, he's not. And then, so quietly, I almost missed it. Neither are you. I held his gaze. I pressed my hand to my chest. The habit was automatic now, grounding myself against the constant warm pressure of the thing inside me. His eyes dropped to my hand, and something shifted in his face. Sarah, he said. I know, I said. We need to talk about what... I know, I said again. Tonight, he said. Tonight, I agreed. And we went our separate ways through the keep, each carrying the weight of what was coming. But something had changed between the lower hall and the corridor. The word that had been hovering unspoken for days felt different now. Closer. Like a door that was no longer locked, only closed, and both of us standing on opposite sides of it. Chapter 9. He came to the war room at dusk. Not the garden, not the corridor. The war room, which felt deliberate, a space we had already shared, where we had already been honest with each other across a table in torchlight. I was there when he arrived. I had come early. I had told myself that was about the accounts, and had not believed myself even slightly. He closed the door behind him. He did not go to the war table. He went to the fireplace, a deep stone hearth at the far wall, where a fire had been lit against the evening chill, and stood with his back to it, arms at his sides, with the particular posture of a man who has decided to stop managing himself and face something directly. I stood a few feet away. The fire behind him made his outline enormous and warm. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," I said. "I have felt the mate bond before." I went very still. "7 years ago," he said. "A she-wolf from the Thornwall pack. The recognition was immediate, mutual." His jaw worked. "She died 4 months later in a border raid, before we had completed the bond." The words fell into the room like stones into water. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it completely. "After that," he continued, "I closed it. I don't know another way to describe it. I found the place in myself where the bond had been trying to take root, and I closed it. I told myself I had fulfilled whatever obligation fate had assigned, and it had been destroyed before completion, and I was done." He looked at me steadily. "I believed that for 7 years. I understood what was coming. I waited. And then I walked into the Asheville Great Hall," he said, "and you told me no, and everything I had convinced myself of for 7 years became irrelevant." I offered softly, "Immediately and completely irrelevant." He exhaled. "Which is why I spent 5 days walking through every room you weren't in." "I noticed," I said. "I know you noticed." The ghost of that almost smile. "You notice everything." I moved to the fire, stood beside him, facing outward, the heat of it against my face, the heat of him against my arm. "I have no wolf," I said. "Or I was told I had no wolf, but something has been—" I pressed my hand to my chest. "Something is here. It's been growing since the moment you touched me." "Show me," he said. I turned to look at him. "What you feel." "Show me." He reached out and very gently took the hand I had pressed against my chest. He held it between both of his, warm, careful, like something he was choosing to handle with extraordinary care. The moment his hands closed around mine, the thing beneath my ribs answered. It didn't just pulse. It expanded. I heard him inhale sharply. "You feel that?" I said. "I feel it," he said. His hands tightened on mine. "It's not possible," he said, but his voice said it as wonder, not refusal. "A wolf that never manifested, I've never heard of." The healer said some are born without the second soul. My voice was not entirely steady. But what if she was wrong? What if it wasn't absent, it was just waiting, dormant? I looked up at him. What if it needed to be called by something specific? He was looking at me with an expression that stripped away every layer of the iron ghost, every constructed wall, every 7 years of careful self-management. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something enormous. "By someone specific," he said, very quietly. The fire crackled. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the pines. "Kale," I said, "what does it mean if it's real?" He looked at me for a long moment. "It means," he said slowly, "that fate has decided something about the two of us that neither of us was consulted about." "Does that bother you?" He considered this with his characteristic seriousness, the man who understood before he decided. "It bothered me," he said, "for about 4 days. And then I stopped being able to make myself care that it wasn't my idea. Something in me that had been tightly wound for 19 years began, very slowly, to release." "We have problems," I said. "Several." "Gray mirror?" "Yes." "The fact that my pack sold me, and would likely prefer I stay, disappeared." Yes. The political complexity of an alpha bonding with a tribute. Exceptional. And a mate bond that has no precedent and cannot be explained and may not function the way bonds are supposed to function because I don't. He kissed me. Not impulsively, not hungrily. The way he did everything. With deliberateness. With the quality of a man making an irrevocable choice and knowing exactly what he was doing. He released my hand and brought both of his to my face. And he kissed me like the period at the end of the longest sentence either of us had ever tried to finish. The thing inside my chest did not roar this time. It settled, deep and absolute and vast, like something that had been searching for a long time had found the shore it was looking for. I kissed him back. Because there was no alternative. Because 19 years of being told I was incomplete had just been answered in the most profound and impossible way I could have imagined. Because his hands on my face were careful and warm and treated me like something of extraordinary value. When we broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads nearly touching, his hands still framing my face. Still have the problems, I said, slightly breathless. Still have every single one of them, he agreed. We should address them. Tomorrow, he said. Kyle, tomorrow? He pulled back enough to look at me properly. His eyes in the firelight were not cold at all. They were deep and warm and exhausted with trying to pretend otherwise. Tonight I would like to simply have this, without any of the problems, for one evening. I looked at him, at this man who had not asked for me and had protected me anyway, who understood before he decided, who had laughed exactly once, briefly, roughly, and transformed entirely. One evening, I said. One evening, he agreed. And we sat by the fire and talked, really talked, for the first time, not about territory or threats or logistics, about the things that live underneath all of that, the things that make a person who they are before the world gets its hands on them. He told me about the mountains he had grown up in, about his father, who had ruled without warmth and what that had cost, about the she-wolf he had lost, and the way grief had become a shape he had learned to build his life around. I told him about my parents, about the door I had stood behind at 7, listening to the healer explain what I was, about the years of being useful enough to keep and insufficient enough to discount, about the anger I had learned to fold small. Neither of us reached for the other again. It was not the right time, but the fire burned low and we let it, and the evening was exactly what he had asked for. Simple, honest, ours. But it was not going to stay simple. I knew that. He knew that. When I finally rose to go back to my room, he walked me to the door of the war room and stopped. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, I said. I walked down the corridor with my hand pressed to my chest and the thing inside me breathing slow and steady and entirely at home. I didn't know that tomorrow would come with fire. I didn't know that Greymere had not finished. I didn't know that the people I thought were furthest from this story were about to walk into the center of it. I didn't know, but I should have, because fate, having decided to give me everything I'd never had, was not going to do it without a cost. Chapter 10. The morning arrived with smoke, not the wood smoke of hearth fires and kitchens. Something darker, something with distance in it, carrying on the wind from the south, faint but unmistakable, the kind of smell that makes the body go cold before the mind has finished recognizing it. I was in the herb garden when I caught it. I stood up slowly. The mountain air was still and pale, the kind of early morning that held sound clearly. And now that I was listening, really listening, I could hear it underneath the smoke. Horns, distant, plural, not the single clear tone of the gate bell. Something older and more urgent, the deep, resonant call of war horns blowing from the southern approach. I was running before I had decided to run. The keep erupted. Not into panic. Iron Maw warriors didn't panic, I was learning, but into the controlled ferocity of a household that had been built for exactly this. Warriors moving to their positions. The gate reinforced, archers to the walls. The women and children of the inner settlement directed to the lower halls of the keep where the stone was thickest. I found Kyle in the outer courtyard. He was in full battle leather, dark armor, short sword at his hip, a longer blade across his back that I hadn't seen him carry before. His senior warriors flanked him, and Mira stood at his shoulder with a face like carved stone. He saw me coming, and something moved through his expression that he didn't have time to manage. "Tell me," I said. "Greymere. 40 men, possibly more, coming from the South Road." His jaw was hard. "This isn't a pressure campaign anymore. Duran has decided to force the issue." "He's attacking the keep directly?" "Not the keep." His eyes met mine. "He sent a rider ahead, under truce flag." The words arranged themselves into a shape I didn't want them to make. "He's making demands," I said. "One demand," Kale said. "You." The courtyard noise continued around us. Commands, movement, the ring of weapons being checked and strapped, and in the middle of all of it, we stood looking at each other across a truth that had become as sharp as a blade. "If you give him what he wants," I said carefully, "he withdraws. He claims he will. Do you believe him?" "No." Kale's voice was flat. "Duran doesn't stop. He takes the concession and escalates the next demand. Giving him, you would tell him this pack will bend under pressure, which would only begin a new campaign immediately." "So regardless of me," I said, "the answer is no. Regardless of everything, the answer is no." He held my gaze with an intensity that made breathing briefly complicated. "I want you inside the keep, lower hall, with the others." "Kyle, please." The word again, rough and real. "Not because I think you can't handle yourself. Because 40 armed Greymere men do not care how capable you are, and I cannot." He stopped himself, started differently. "I need to know where you are." I looked at him, at the controlled ferocity and the thing underneath it that wasn't controlled at all. "Lower hall," I said. "I'll go." Something in him released. "After this is over," he said. "After this is over," I agreed. I turned to go inside. I heard him behind me, already moving toward the gate, already issuing orders in that low, carrying voice. I did not let myself turn back. The lower hall was crowded and warm and thick with the particular energy of people trying to be calm. Children, old ones, a handful of women whose partners were on the walls. Tam was there. I spotted him in the corner, his face pale and set with a guilt that hadn't fully lifted yet. I went and sat near him. He looked at me. "This is my fault," he said. "This is Greymere's fault," I said. "You were a tool they used. The hand that throws a stone is responsible for where it lands, not the stone." He stared at the floor. "My sister," he said. "Kyle sent scouts," I said. "They'll find her." He nodded, not quite believing it yet, and I didn't push him. I sat and listened to the sounds of the keep above us, the deep boom of the gate, commands I couldn't make out, the shift of stone as the walls absorb something, force or impact, or simply the weight of 40 men arriving at them. And then, nothing. A silence that was almost worse than noise. I sat very still and felt the thing in my chest, which had not been still at all since the smoke arrived. It moved constantly, urgently, with the quality of something that knew its other half was in danger and was constitutionally unable to be rational about that. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum. "He's all right," I told it. "He knows what he's doing." It did not find this as reassuring as I intended. Then Mira came through the lower hall door. Her face told me something had changed before she spoke a single word. "Sarah," she said, "come with me." She took me not upstairs but further back, through a narrow stone passage I hadn't known existed, into a small chamber beneath the east tower that smelled of old iron and cold earth. It was an armory, older than the main one, smaller. Blades hung on hooks along the walls, older-fashioned than the warriors carried now, but maintained, sharp, present. "What's happening?" I said. "Duran is at the gate," Mira said. He rode to the front himself. She paused, which means he came for a confrontation, not just a raid. Kyle won't negotiate. He is negotiating. She met my eyes. Buying time. His men are positioned along the walls. If Duran moves on the gate, they respond immediately. But Duran knows that. He's not trying to breach the wall. What is he trying to do? Mira was quiet for one careful moment. He's asking Kale to prove you're not here, she said. The cold came quickly. He wants Kale to open the gate and demonstrate that the tribute isn't worth protecting, I said. Prove there's no attachment. Yes. And if Kale refuses to open the gate, it confirms the attachment, which confirms Duran's leverage. She folded her hands. If Kyle opens the gate, he gives Darren access and surrenders the advantage of the walls. I pressed my hands against my thighs. It's a trap either way. Yes. Then what is Kale doing? Stalling. A slight pause. And hoping you'll be willing to help him close the trap from the inside. I looked at her. Tell me, I said. The plan was simple. Simple plans are usually the most dangerous ones. I would not go to the gate. Mira would send word to Kale, through a signal agreed in advance, that I was in the old armory beneath the east tower. Kale would open the gate to demonstrate nothing was being hidden, invite Darren inside the outer courtyard, and while Darren's attention was on the apparent proof of no attachment, his men, positioned around the walls and the courtyard, would close the gap. He's using himself as the visible piece, I said. Yes. While 40 armed Greymere men are inside the outer courtyard, his warriors will outnumber them. Will they? Mira held my gaze. Kale has never lost a confrontation inside his own walls, I breathed. What do I do? I asked. Stay here. Do not come out until you hear 3 strikes on the passage door. She paused. Under any circumstances. Under any circumstances, I repeated. She left. I stood alone in the old armory, with swords on the walls, and cold earth under my feet, and the thing in my chest turning over and over like a trapped animal. I reached up and took one of the old blades from the wall. It was heavier than the camp knife. Short-bladed, meant for close work. I held it and felt the weight settle into my palm. 18 months, a voice whispered in my memory. My father, teaching me to hold a blade before fever took him. Learn this. A wolf who knows her own teeth is never fully without them. I had been 7. I had held the memory close for 12 years without understanding why. I understood now. I stood in the dark chamber and I waited. And deep inside my chest, the thing that had been stirring for 8 days stopped turning. It went still, the way a wolf goes still before it moves. 3 strikes came, then a pause, then 4 more. Not the signal. Different. Urgent. I was through the passage door before the 4th strike finished. The outer courtyard was chaos, not the clean, controlled chaos of a prepared defense. Something had gone wrong. I couldn't see what yet, moving through the passage exit at the east wall base, but I could hear it. Too many voices. Metal striking metal from a direction that shouldn't have had metal. I came around the granary wall and understood immediately. A second Greymere group, smaller, perhaps 8 men, had come over the east wall. The same section as before. While Darren held Kyle's attention at the gate, a secondary team had used the same entry point. Not as bait, as a strike team. And they were heading directly for the keep's inner door. Directly for the lower hall, where the children were. I didn't think, I ran. The passage between the granary and the keep's east face was narrow and shadowed, and I reached it before the Greymere men did. Barely, a matter of seconds. I put my back to the inner door, the old blade in my hand, and I faced them. 8 men, 1 wolfless girl with a short blade and a decision. The lead man stopped. He looked at me. Then he laughed. "Move," he said. "No," I said. My voice was very steady. I noticed that distantly, the way you notice things at the edges of moments that have become enormous. The steadiness of my voice, the stillness in my hands, the absence of the fear I expected to be drowning in. and something else, something extraordinary, something that had been waking slowly beneath my ribs for 8 days, something that had gone still and ready in the armory, something that recognized, in this moment, exactly what it needed to do. It came like a tide that had been building for 19 years, not slowly, all at once. Heat, then fire, then something that was both of those things and neither, something that started in my chest and moved outward through my bones the way light moves through water, all direction at once. My vision sharpened to a degree that had no precedent. The sense of the courtyard became a map: smoke, iron, sweat, fear, the cold mountain air, and underneath all of it, cedar and iron and warmth, far away at the gate, alive, moving this way. The lead gray mirror man took a step toward me, and I shifted. 19 years. That was how long my wolf had been waiting. She came without apology and without gentleness, a creature that had been contained for 2 decades and had no interest in easing anyone into her arrival. The shift was fire and pressure, and the exquisite, terrible release of a locked thing finally opening. I was aware of the blade falling from my hand. I was aware of the cobblestones, and then not the cobblestones. And then I was something else. Not gone. Still present. Still Sarah. Still the girl from Asheville, with the folded anger and the camp knife and the accounts in the war room. But expanded. Amplified. Every sense sharpened past what I had known was possible. The gray mirror men stopped. Completely. Because the wolf standing between them and the inner door was not small, not young, not the wolfless tribute they had been sent to neutralize. I didn't know, in that moment, what I looked like. I only knew what I felt. And what I felt was the absence of every doubt I had ever carried. They ran. 3 of them ran immediately. The other 5 held for a moment. Experienced men, not easily frightened. And then 2 Iron Maw warriors came around the granary at a dead run, and the calculus changed fast. The gray mirror men chose retreat. It was over in seconds. I stood in the courtyard, breathing hard, the cold mountain air against a body that was new and familiar at once. And then he was there. Kale came around the east face of the keep at a dead run, 2 warriors behind him, and he stopped. He stopped completely. He stood 10 feet away and looked at me. His expression was something I had no complete name for. It moved through shock and recognition, and something that lived far past both of those. I shifted back. Slowly, this time. The return was gentler than the arrival. I came back to myself on the cold cobblestones, and it took a moment to find my feet, and my breath, and the particular calibration of the world at human height. He was across the space between us before I had finished standing up. His hands caught my face the same way they had by the fire. Careful, certain. "Sarah," he said. His voice was not steady. It was the first time I had heard it unsteady. "I'm all right," I said. "You shifted." "I did." "You—" He stopped, searched my face with those pale eyes. "You have a wolf." "Apparently," I said. "I always did." He made a sound that wasn't a word. His forehead came down to mine, and we stood like that, foreheads pressed together, his hands on my face, my hands finding his forearms, in the middle of the courtyard, with the sounds of the confrontation resolving around us. "Duran?" I managed. "Contained," he said. "His men surrendered when the secondary group retreated. He's in custody." A pause. "He'll face pack tribunal." "And his men?" "Disarmed. Being processed." I exhaled slowly. The fire in my chest had settled into something I recognized now. Fully, completely, without confusion or argument. The bond. Complete. Both sides. 2 wolves. "Kyle," I said. "I know," he said. "The bond. I know." "What does—" "I know." He pulled back enough to look at me. His eyes were very bright. "I know what it means. And I know what I want it to mean." He held my gaze with absolute steadiness. "If you do." I looked at him. At the man fate had chosen for me in the most impractical, impossible, extraordinary way imaginable. Ask me properly, I said. The ghost of the almost smile appeared. Then it became real. Not brief this time, not rough. A full and genuine and devastating smile that I felt land somewhere deep in my chest and quietly rearrange everything. He was still holding my face. Will you accept the bond? He said. With me, as my mate. I pressed my hands over his. Yes, I said, even with all the problems. I'll handle them, I said. He laughed. The second time, and this one lasted longer. Chapter 11. Darren of Greymere was a broad, dark-haired man of perhaps 40 who had spent his entire adult life being the most powerful person in whatever room he entered. He was not the most powerful person in the Ironmaw war room. He sat across the war table from Kyle, with 2 warriors at each wall, and the particular expression of a man recalibrating a situation that had moved several steps beyond what he had planned for. His weapons were gone. His men were disarmed and held in the outer courtyard. His secondary team had retreated to the tree line and been collected by Ironmaw scouts within the hour. I stood to Kyle's right. Darren's eyes kept coming back to me. Not with desire or contempt. With the assessing gaze of a strategist who had made a fundamental error in his calculations and was still working out exactly where. You sent armed men over my wall, Kyle said. His voice was completely level. Toward the hall where the women and children of this pack shelter during conflict. Explain your reasoning. A tactical diversionary measure, Darren said, smooth as oil. They had orders not to. They were 8 armed men moving toward an interior door. Kale's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Whatever orders you gave them, their direction and their weapons tell a cleaner story. Darren shifted. This entire situation could have been avoided if I had given you what you asked for. Kale leaned back slightly. Which was a person who is under my protection, who is, as of this morning, my mate. Darren's eyes cut to me, then back to Kyle. He recalibrated again. The mate bond, he said carefully, with a wolf who was declared wolfless. Incorrectly declared, I said. Darren looked at me with the full weight of his attention for the first time. I met his gaze without flinching. You have no political standing, he said, not cruelly, analytically. I have a wolf, I said. I have the Alpha's bond, and I have a fairly complete record of every supply overcharge, territorial violation, and political maneuver you've made in the last 8 months, which Corin has been kind enough to document. I folded my hands on the table. Would you like to discuss political standing at more length? Silence. Kale said nothing, but I felt beside me the quality of his stillness, not tension, something warmer. The particular stillness of someone deeply, quietly pleased. Darren looked between us. What are your terms? He said finally. Full withdrawal from Ironmaw borders, Kale said. Permanent cession of the Eastern Ridge access. It was ours by treaty 5 years ago, and you've been encroaching since last winter. Return of all persons taken from neighboring packs in the last year. He paused. Including the girl currently held in your southern holding. Tam's sister. Duran's jaw tightened. That's non-negotiable, Kyle said. Every item. And if I refuse? Then I call the 5-pack tribunal, Kyle said. I present the evidence of your territorial violations, your coerced informant, your attack on a protected household, including the interior where children shelter, and your breach of the tribute compact. He held Duran's gaze without any particular heat. The tribunal will rule. I have reasonable confidence in the direction of that ruling. Duran was silent for a long moment. A man who had spent 2 years escalating and found the wall he couldn't escalate past. I'll need time to... You'll sign the terms today, Kyle said. Your men will begin returning to Greymere by nightfall. The Eastern Ridge survey will begin within the fortnight. He rose. I'll have Corin draw the documents. He walked to the door. He paused. He looked at Duran with an expression that was almost, but not quite, without warmth. "You came to my keep," Kale said, "to take something you believed I valued. You were right that I valued it." A pause. The mistake was believing that made it a vulnerability. He left. I looked at Duran across the table. He looked at me. "The wolfless girl," he said, with something in his voice that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, and was landing somewhere closer to the latter. "Not wolfless," I said, and I followed my mate out of the war room. The afternoon was long and detailed, and full of exactly the kind of work that matters enormously and resists being made interesting. Documents and signatures and the careful, precise dismantling of a military posture that required coordination between a dozen people at once. I helped Corin with the documents. Tam received word by evening that the scouts had found his sister. Alive. Unharmed. Being escorted back by 2 Ironmaw warriors who would arrive within 3 days. I was in the corridor outside the war room when Mira told him. I watched his face as the news hit him, the collapse of weeks of terror into something that had no clean name, the particular devastation of relief when it comes after you had stopped expecting it. He made a sound that was not quite a word and pressed his hands over his face. I left him to it. Some things need their privacy. By nightfall, Greymere had gone. Not gracefully, Darren left with the tight, furious dignity of a man who had lost comprehensively and was determined to carry it correctly, but completely. The outer courtyard was empty. The walls held only Ironmaw guards. The keep breathed. I stood on the east wall walkway and watched the last of the Greymere torches disappear into the southern tree line, and felt the mountain air against my face, and tried to locate within myself the exhaustion I was certain should be there. It wasn't. What I found instead was something clean and large and very quiet, like a shore after a storm, like stone after rain, footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn to know. "It's over," I said. "For now," Kale said. He came to stand beside me at the wall, his arm pressed against mine. "Duran won't come back quickly. The tribunal threat is genuine and he knows it. He'll need a year at least to rebuild the political position. And then we'll handle it." He paused. "Together, presumably. If you're staying." I turned to look at him. He was watching the tree line, but his attention was entirely on me. I had learned to read that by now, the way his focus could be pointed in one direction and located somewhere completely different. "Are you asking if I'm staying?" I said. "I'm noting," he said carefully, "that a mate bond is a choice, not just fate. The fate creates the connection. The choice is what you do with it." I looked at his profile in the torchlight, the hard jaw and the dark hair and the eyes that were never actually cold. "I have nowhere to return to," I said. "That's not a reason to stay." "No," I agreed. "It's not." I turned back to the tree line. "I'm staying because this place has a room with a latch on the inside, and a steward who asked my opinion on grain stores, and a young man who needed someone to tell him he wasn't the stone, he was the hand." I paused. "And an alpha who stopped avoiding the thing he was afraid of and chose to face it instead." He was quiet. "And because," I said more quietly, "whatever was sleeping inside me for 19 years woke up here. I don't think it would go back to sleep if I left. And I don't want it to." The mountain wind moved between us. "Sarah," he said. "Yes?" "I have never—" He stopped, gathered himself in the particular way of a very private man, attempting genuine openness. "I have never wanted to protect something the way I want to protect you, and I am aware that you don't need it. I am aware that you spent 19 years protecting yourself without any assistance, and that you will continue to do so regardless of what I want." He finally turned to look at me. "But I would like to do it alongside you, if that's acceptable." Something in my chest, the wolf, the bond, the thing that had been sleeping, rose warm and certain and complete. "It's acceptable," I said. He reached down and took my hand. Not dramatically, just took it. folded it inside his, the way you hold something you intend to keep. We stood on the east wall while the last Greymere torch vanished into the dark and the mountain breathed around us, and neither of us felt the need to add anything to what was already, finally, completely said. Chapter 12. 3 days later, Tam's sister came home. Her name was Elin. She was 15 and slight, and she had her brother's dark eyes, and when she came through the inner gate and saw him waiting in the courtyard, she ran, still limping slightly from whatever the journey had cost her. And he caught her, and they held each other in the morning light, with a fierceness that made several of the watching warriors find sudden interest in the middle distance. I watched from the doorway of the keep. Kale came to stand beside me. "She's unharmed?" I said. "Physically," he said. "She'll need time." "She'll have it." He looked at me sideways. "You've already decided she stays here." "She can't go back to Asheville. She was taken from a border zone that was technically Ironmaw adjacent anyway. She has no other pack." I kept watching Tam and Elin. "And she'll need someone who knows what it is to be the person the pack doesn't quite have a category for." He was quiet for a moment. "You're collecting people," he said. "I'm recognizing them," I corrected. "There's a difference." He made a sound that was definitely the edge of a laugh. The bond completion ceremony was not elaborate. Kyle had offered me elaborate, had described, with the careful formality of someone who wanted to do things correctly, the full traditional ceremony that Ironmaw custom prescribed. Pack gathered in the great hall. Ancient words spoken before witnesses. 3 days of formal proceedings. I had looked at him across the war room table and said, "Or we could not do that." He had blinked. "The bond is already real," I said. "Everything that matters has already happened. What would the ceremony add?" "Legitimacy," he said. "Formal recognition. The pack needs to—" "The pack watched me shift in the courtyard 3 days ago to defend their inner door," I said. "I think I have their attention." He had looked at me for a long, considering moment. Then, "What would you like instead?" "Something small," I said. "Something real." It was dusk. The sacred ground lay just outside the northern wall, a clearing in the pines where the mountain ran flat for a quarter-mile and the sky was unobstructed. A fire had been built at the center. Old stones circled it, worn by a century of ceremonies. Mira stood as witness. 2 of Kael's senior warriors. Lyra, who had appeared at the edge of the clearing with her dark braids and sharp eyes, and the expression of someone who had decided she was going to witness this, regardless of whether she had been invited. I had let her stay. Kyle and I stood at the fire. He had told me the old words, the ones that existed before ceremony and tradition and formal proceedings, the ones that were just 2 wolves finding each other and choosing to stay found. We spoke them together, not in performance, not for the witnesses, for each other. The fire moved in a wind off the mountain. The moon, 3/4 full, was already rising in the eastern sky. And when the words were finished, he looked at me with those eyes that had never actually been cold and said, very quietly, just for me, "I spent 7 years building walls against this." "I know," I said. "I would build every single one of them again," he said, "if they all ended here." I reached up and pressed my palm against his jaw. He leaned into it, and the wolf inside me, the one that had waited 19 years to be called, the one that had answered to gravity and cedar and iron, and the particular warmth of a man who understood before he decided. She settled. Fully. Finally. Home. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. I want to say that clearly, because the truth of things matters more than the shape we'd prefer them to take. There were pack members who questioned the bond, not cruelly, but with the reasonable skepticism of people whose alpha had chosen an outsider, a former tribute, a woman whose wolf had never manifested before. There were political conversations with neighboring packs about the change in Ironmaw's household structure. There were ongoing negotiations with Greymere's council. Darren had signed the terms, but his counselors were slow to implement them, and Karen and I spent 3 weeks in correspondence that required precision and patience in equal measure. There was the slow, complex work of learning each other. Cale was not easy, not in the soft ways. He was private and exacting, and he had spent so long running a household on pure will that asking for help felt foreign in his hands. I learned to offer rather than ask, to put the ledger in front of him and say, "I noticed this," rather than "you should look at this." He learned to say, "I need more time," before he retreated behind walls. Rather than simply retreating, he learned that I didn't want managing. I wanted partnership. I learned that he had never been given a model for that. We built it between us. Slowly. The way you build anything that will last. With care, with adjustment, with the willingness to be wrong and return to the work anyway. Elin healed. Slowly and then faster. She took to the herb garden with a single-mindedness that Mira approved of immediately, and within a month, she was helping with the medicinal stores, and within 2, she was learning their cataloging system. She and Lyra became the kind of friends that form quickly between people who recognize something in each other. Tam worked his debt down and rebuilt his standing in the stable with the focused energy of a person determined to be trustworthy. One evening, perhaps 6 weeks after everything, he stopped me in the inner courtyard and simply said, "Thank you for not writing me off." I told him that was Cale's decision. He said, "It was yours first." I didn't argue. The Eastern Ridge was surveyed and restored to Iron Maw territory. The 5-pack diplomatic conversations about Greymere's behavior were slow and involved and resulted in nothing dramatic, which meant they resulted in exactly what they were supposed to: a record, a witness, a precedent. Darren would know the record existed. That would be enough for a while. One morning, perhaps 2 months after the Greymere confrontation, I woke before dawn and lay in the warm dark of a room that was no longer small and narrow, but large and stone-floored and smelled of cedarwood and iron. I lay still and listened to the mountain breathing. I thought about the night they had sold me, the iron rope, my Alpha's relief, the moon overhead, watching and saying nothing. I had stood in that hall and made one promise: whatever comes next, whatever that man intended to make of me, I will not break. I had not broken. What I had done instead was something I hadn't had the language to imagine, standing in that hall with my wrists bound and my pack turning its eyes away. I had become not what they had decided I was, not the absence where a wolf should be, not the most disposable piece on the board. Myself, the wolf that had waited 19 years, the woman who had folded anger small enough to carry and then, when the time came, unfolded it completely. The person who had walked into an enemy's keep and found, against every logic, against every rule of fate and territory and sworn enmity, home. Beside me, Cale shifted in his sleep. His arm came across me with the easy, unconscious certainty of someone whose body knew where it belonged. I pressed my hand over his. He stilled, settled. The mountain breathed. The moon, outside the window, was full. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I thought, "You were there all along, weren't you? Not cruel, not watching and saying nothing, waiting. The way my wolf had waited, the way the right things always wait, patient and certain, and entirely sure that what was meant will find its way." I closed my eyes and slept. Epilogue. 6 months later, I ran, not from anything, toward the northern clearing. The sacred ground with the old stones and the sky unobstructed was silver white with full moonlight when I crossed the tree line and let the shift come. It came easily now, the way breathing comes easily once you remember you were doing it wrong. My wolf emerged not as fire, but as a tide, smooth and natural and deeply mine. She was dark. I hadn't known that until the first time Cale described her to me. Dark as the Iron Maw stone, he'd said, which I had not known how to feel about, and had eventually decided felt correct. She ran the clearing perimeter, and I ran with her, and after a while, Cale was there. His wolf, enormous and pale gray at the edges, moving alongside mine with the particular ease of something that has found its natural speed. We ran the way things run when they are not running from anything. When the world is large and cold and good, and the moon is full overhead, and the mountain air carries pine and iron, and the deep mineral scent of old stone, we ran until we stopped in the center of the clearing and stood in the moonlight breathing. I shifted back. He shifted back. We stood looking at each other in the silver light, disheveled and cold-cheeked, and with that particular aliveness that follows a good run. "Mira says the Thornwall delegation arrives next week," I said. "I know." "She wants to discuss new trade terms." "I know." He stepped closer. "Corin found another overcharge from the Valley merchant." "Sierra." He took my face in his hands. "It's a significant overcharge, nearly 4 months' accumulation of—" He kissed me, thoroughly and without apology. When we broke apart, I was smiling, and he was as close to openly delighted as I had ever seen him. "The accounts will be there tomorrow?" he said. "They will," I agreed. Above us, the moon was enormous and silver, and completely indifferent to all schedules and supply ledgers. I looked up at her. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. Some things don't need to be said. They just need to be kept. The moon kept us. The mountain kept us. And we, the iron ghost who had never actually been cold, and the wolfless girl who had never actually been without a wolf, kept each other. Exactly as it was always meant to be. The night they sold me, the moon was full. I thought that was cruel. I was wrong. She was simply waiting for the right moment to show me what she'd already decided. She usually is. End. What part of Sarah and Kael's story stayed with you the most? The moment she shifted? The night by the fire? Or something else entirely? Tell me in the comments.